You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 9th of July 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. They're led by sick people. They're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it.
The ceasefire is over. Donald Trump says dealing with Tehran is a waste of time and the conflict reignites. We'll have the latest after another round of fierce airstrikes overnight. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, we assess a growing crisis in Mali as Tuareg and Al-Qaeda rebels laid siege to a key town in the north. We'll hear more about the Indian Prime Minister's trip to Melbourne as his country grows more reliant on Australian uranium exports. We'll go through Thursday's newspapers and
we'll tell you everything you need to know to make it to your Italian holiday and back without a ticket.
Anita Riotta will join me in the studio to tell us why the villagers of Verena have got fed up with people bearing their chests. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, though, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Residents in Taiwan, and southwestern Japan are bracing for a major typhoon, which is expected to reach the area this weekend. Search teams have recovered wreckage from a cargo plane that went missing off the coast of Pakistan on Tuesday. And the HBO Max show The Pit leads the Emmy Awards race this year with 25 nominations. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, we are back to square one as the US and Iran have abandoned their ceasefire and returned to war. The ferocious exchange of words began with the US president calling the leadership in Tehran scum.
As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars. We make a deal. They go outside, talk to the press. They say, we never even talked about it. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo.
Iran's foreign ministry responded by accusing Washington of being the side which broke the ceasefire first and said not even a single American soldier will return alive in response to Mr. Trump's threat to invade Iran's Karg Island. Well, overnight, the conflict reignited, and to bring us more, I'm joined now by Layla Milana-Allen, who's Monocle's Middle East correspondent. Good morning to you, Layla.
Morning.
So what happened overnight, please?
So overnight, we've seen another 90 sites in the south of Iran struck by the US. That brings us up to about 170 in the last few days. That's a huge number of strikes. All multiple cities and areas in the south of Iran have been struck. The US says that the things they've struck have included air defense systems, coastal surveillance assets, missile and drone storage sites, naval capabilities, military logistic infrastructure. They targeted for the first time the city of Chabahar, and Trump himself posted a picture of what looks like explosions there. Now, we've had reports of at least 8 deaths of Iranian military, 3 civilians. Those reports are still coming in. A lot of destruction there, including to a large naval site. So this has been a large-scale reaction from the US, as I say, nearly 200 sites over those 2 days. Meanwhile, we saw reaction from Iran this morning on US allies in the Gulf. At least 3 places struck there. We've seen confirmed attacks. Iran says that they've struck more than 80 sites in Bahrain and in Qatar and in Kuwait. And we've seen confirmation from Kuwait that they've been fielding off drones and missiles all morning, and that the Bahraini capitals have been struck, as well as the US naval base there.
So it was clear before this started again overnight that there was no love lost between these two sides, that ordinarily there is occasionally a little bit of a, dare we say, a sort of things are dressed up with niceties by saying it is regrettable that, or we tried very hard, but this one was straight to gloves off, wasn't it? These two sides, I mean, it is indicative that this has not been an easy ceasefire to maintain up until this point.
That's absolutely right. And this memorandum of understanding that was signed in Islamabad was so hard won and really pushed through by allies and negotiators of both sides. Both Iran and the US were very determined that they wanted to have certain wording there, and they wanted to sort of, save face, so to speak, after this war. And that has resulted in, as you say, incredibly hostile responses from both sides, with what does appear to have started on Monday night, Tuesday morning, with attacks on 3 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. It's still unclear. Neither side has confirmed exactly what they think happened there. There were reports, as I say, of 3 different attacks. Some analysts have said that they think that perhaps one of these attacks on a vessel was because of mines that are still in the Strait of Hormuz that Iran is trying to clear, but there were reports that at least 2 others started by projectiles. So the US says that Iran started this, that they hit these vessels that were transiting through after having promised that the strait would be cleared. And of course, the US, because of international oil prices and other shipping issues, has prioritized that as an issue. Iran, meanwhile, says that the US hasn't kept its promises. So we've seen this very vicious, as you say, attacks from both sides verbally. Mohammad Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament in Iran, who is the key negotiator in this period, the ceasefire period where they're trying to get to a proper deal, turned around and said, look, the US still hasn't realized that if they break their promises, there will be consequences, and you're never going to have the Strait of Hormuz be run simply by American desires. It's only going to be open by Iranian coordination, Iranian organization. Trump, meanwhile, essentially washing his hands yesterday when he made comments at the NATO summit. He said, I don't want to deal with these people anymore. They can talk as much as they like. They're desperate for a deal, but I'm sick and tired of talking to them. As you played in that clip there, he called Iranian scum. Now, the Iranian government responded saying, we will not respond to that sort of vulgarity, but we will just continue steadfastly to respond militarily and crushingly in response to what the US is doing.
Meanwhile, oil prices rise and stock markets fall because we return now to global instability and disrupted supply chains, don't we?
Yes, so we have seen yesterday, of course, in response to these attacks, the price of Brent crude jumped nearly 5%. But it has sort of seemed to stabilize at the moment. The markets are trying to respond to this not too aggressively and too fearfully. It's only risen about another percentage point today, still under about $80 a barrel. Of course, we saw it go up to around 120 during the war at its peak in April. So it does seem that at the moment people feel, okay, perhaps this will be just a couple of days of trading responses. The question is whether they're able to get back to the negotiating table quickly and say, okay, we've both sort of reacted, we've both got this out of it, because this did, of course, happen as well a couple of weeks ago when there were very limited strikes, and there was concern that that could kick off the war again. It didn't. So at the moment, there does seem to be hope that the ceasefire will hold, that these strikes might be enough for both sides to feel that they've sort of made their point. But of course, we are still in only the ceasefire period. This was just a 60-day ceasefire that was agreed in order to negotiate the rest of the deal. So if that puts this deal on hold, and as I say, the key negotiator for Iran there, incredibly hostile, incredibly angry, if that doesn't move forward, then we are likely to start seeing shocks to the market again.
Indeed, and despite the fact that there are hopes that people will go around and return to the negotiating table, the tone that comes from Washington, or rather from Donald Trump in particular, is incredibly harsh. It says, there is no point in dealing with them anymore. They're scum, they're sick, they're led by sick people. And also, I'm not sure I want a deal. Let's just finish the job. What do you think he might mean by finishing the job?
Well, for him, finishing the job means, crushing Iran, crushing the military leadership, which has become incredibly clear during this war that he cannot do, that the US cannot do. This war has been, however you want to frame it, a humiliation for this American administration. It started with all these grand, lofty goals, and by the end of the war, really, or this period of the war, all they were aiming for was to open the Strait of Hormuz and get back into nuclear negotiations, the two things that were already happening before the war was launched on the 28th of February. So it has been a huge climb down. He might say that as much as he likes, President Trump, but the reality is it's been proven that they cannot defeat this Iranian government with the military tactics that they have at the moment. Now, of course, we've seen this throughout negotiations, that President Trump will be incredibly bellicose, will say that Iran's on its knees, will say Iran's desperate to make a deal, but we're not sure we want to, we're going to crush them. And then, of course, behind the scenes, there is actually negotiation happening. Everyone's quite keen to make a deal and move on. And of course, Iran desperately needs to rebuild. They desperately need to move forward. They need to boost their economy. They do want what is in this memorandum of understanding, reduction of sanctions, release of their assets, rights. And President Trump, while he said all these very aggressive things yesterday, he did also say, this hasn't really even been a war. This has just been about getting de-nuking Iran, as he called it, getting rid of Iran's nuclear capability. So in that, statement, you do still see that they do want to push that forward. They do want to have this nuclear deal. So I suspect we will now start to see, and of course remember that he was on a grand stage at the NATO summit. He wanted to make it clear, because he's negotiating with NATO as well, he wants the US to be given more in that partnership, for it to be clear that they're the strongest, biggest partners. Excuse me. So I feel that, it's likely we'll see now a little bit of a cooling down, hopefully over the next couple of days, as long as both sides can hold fire, and maybe moving back towards trying to make the ceasefire work again, which is in the interest of both sides and the entire region.
Indeed. I mean, very briefly, the entire region it braces itself for what? For no sign of ending to this? Or do you think Pakistan and Oman will be able to step up and bring the people back round the table again?
That is the hope. They've been relentless in their efforts. Of course, Gulf allies are getting really, really frustrated, angry Gulf allies of the US with these repeated attacks. There is a big danger for the US that their Gulf allies will start to feel, well, actually, is it worth our while, hosting these American military assets when we're constantly coming under fire? Iran, again, has made it very clear, that's been their repeated phrase recently, that before you didn't know what we were capable of. We've now shown you there are consequences. We've now shown you we'll hit you hard, and we won't restrain ourselves from that. So all these countries are desperate for this to stop. And of course, there are political interests as well here. We've got President Trump going into midterm elections with his lowest approval ratings. This war has been a disaster for the American public. They were told it would make them safer, and instead it's not made them safer at all, and indeed just hit their wallets. So everyone does want this, to come to an end. The question is just whether there's able to be a sense in these negotiations that we are hearing already. They're trying to get them off the ground again for the next couple of days. That, enough has been done and we can actually go back to that memorandum of understanding. President Trump says the memorandum of understanding is dead, it's over. I suspect, given how much negotiation went into that, the parties in Oman and Pakistan that negotiated it will be trying incredibly hard right now to make sure that it holds.
Leila Malana Allen, Monocle's Middle East correspondent, thank you so much for joining me on The Globalist. It's 9:12 a.m. in Moscow, 7:12 a.m. here in London. Now, the Malian government and its forces are currently fighting off a series of coordinated rebel attacks across the country. In the north, Al-Qaeda militants and Tuareg fighters are laying siege to the town of Anéfis. Well, for some time now, Russian mercenaries have been offering military support to the Malian authorities under various groupings. So let's find out what help they can give to Mali right now. Well, I'm joined now by Tara O'Connor, who's Managing Director of Africa Risk Consulting, a Pan-African risk management firm. A very good morning to you, Tara.
Good morning.
So just explain to us what's happened in the last week. The 4th of July is a key moment, but more widely, there have been these coordinated attacks across the country.
Yes, as you rightly said, you've actually got two unlikely bedfellows in the Al-Qaeda-linked jihadist insurgents, Jainim and the Front de la Libération de l'Azawad, Azawad Liberation Front, who have joined forces to really launch a series of attacks. And the 4th of July attacks is really just the latest in a series since an upsurge that began with their joint offensives in late April, where they have been targeting key towns, particularly in the north. Kidal was one where they routed the Malian and Russian forces, and then also laying blockades to the capital city, taking control actually in the south of a lot of highways, and disrupting the flow of essential goods to the capital. So, I mean, what's interesting about this is that it shows that these joint operations are showing that the rebel forces are able to put both Russian and Malian forces under pressure in a number of regions around Mali, not just in the north, which is traditionally where the Tuareg separatists tend to operate.
There is a sense, and by all accounts, that the reports are is that the Malian government is very much on the back foot here. Is that correct?
Yes, very much so. Mali has a number of things that they've done recently, which is to sort of ban sort of motorbikes of a certain a certain horsepower, simply because this has been giving these rebel groups, flexibility to move around the country and do these raid and retreat attacks from multiple areas. So even though the Malian Armed Forces is about 25,000 in troop number, and their Russian supporters number about 2,000 at a max, they are really not very good at clearing and then holding, which we've seen in the north.
Tell us a little bit about the involvement of the Russians. And it's been about 5 years now since there has been a significant mercenary presence in Mali. At the start through the Wagner group, but now is it the same fighters but with a different name? We have the Africa group as well. Explain to us what their involvement is in all this.
So really, the Russian troop, exactly as you say, they came originally as Wagner mercenaries, and then when the leader of Wagner died in Russia in suspicious circumstances, the Russian Defense Ministry has actually taken control of operations and supplemented their forces. The Russian Defense Ministry now calls it the Africa Corps, and they are based in key bases with the Malian army in Bamako, Gao and Mopti and Timbuktu, all of which mean that these areas are going to become targets. But they really are very small in number, and they represent a pivot that the Malian junta made towards Russia, having kicked out in 2023 something like 20,000 odd UN peacekeepers and French troops and police forces that were actually securing the north, keeping peace in the north. So it was part of an important geopolitical shift towards Russia. And since then, Russia has become the primary supplier of heavy military equipment, such as attack helicopters, transport helicopters, and so on, and critical intelligence surveillance and communication support. But as you can see, with the increasing confidence of the Tuareg and Jainim and Islamist extremist militants, it has not been very effective.
Explain to us the destabilising effect across the Sahel, the wider region now, if we do have such a huge surge now by coordinated rebels.
So it's, the real difficulty is that is the freedom with which these Jainim in particular is moving across the Sahel. Part of, a key player in the security of the region has been Algeria, and Algeria has consistently tried to encourage the Malian government to have a more constructive relationship with the Tuareg rebels who are pushing for greater autonomy in the north. But Malian government's refusal to do so and its close alliance with Burkina Faso, with Niger, they are all in a defense pact, very much pivoting towards Russia and looking to Russia for support, has meant that effectively they are cut off from regional military support by ECOWAS, by Nigeria, by international Western support. And that means that you are beginning to get a spiral of destabilization in 3 or 4 key Sahelian countries, as really the Islamist militants are able to move with impunity because of the lack of really effective military support, particularly from the West.
Tara O'Connor, Managing Director of Africa Risk Consulting. Thank you so much for joining me on the programme. Still to come on The Globalist.
I'll be taking a look at why the French hotel group Accor's China gamble is starting to look like good business.
That's our Deputy Head of Radio, Tom Webb. He'll be telling us more a little bit later on today's programme. Stay with us.
craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, and obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office House View, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
7:20 here in London. Let's have a look at today's newspapers. To help me do that, in the studio is Vincent McAvenny, journalist for broadcasters, including the BBC and ITV, and a regular Monocle Radio contributor. Good morning, Vinny. How are you?
Good morning. I am well, thanks. Although it's been another sticky, hot night here in London.
Yes, if you're in the northern hemisphere, we're going to be talking about Narendra Modi landing in Melbourne in a little while, and he said it's really cold here, and anybody in the northern hemisphere, or in Europe at least, would try and work out what that word was. Let's have a look at the papers. I mean, we've been talking a little bit at the start of today's programme about Donald Trump and Iran, which is one of those moments when overnight events sweep away the significance of actually another quite significant event, which was the NATO summit a couple of days ago. So the headlines to do with NATO have all gone away now. So let's take a time to revisit it.
Yeah, because there's a lot to unpack. And there was, as is tradition, a family photo, which, of course, when Donald Trump is involved, it gets quite awkward. And particularly because he landed and immediately fired up something from 6 months ago that I think European leaders thought had kindly gone away. And that was his demands that Greenland should be US and not Danish territory. And I think the Times report says that there was a slight weariness from Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen about having to deal with all of this as if NATO hasn't got enough on its plate. She was having to be as diplomatic as possible and saying that she was sadly unsurprised the issue had flared up again, but that the country was ready to defend every inch of its territory, including Greenland, without specifying from whom. So this led all to a quite awkward moment for Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, when he was challenged by a Danish journalist about his levels of self-respect when he could sit there while Donald Trump parroted his attacks on Danish territory, and also that quite interesting attack where he said all trade should be cut off with Spain, no one should go to Spain, and that led to a clip that's gone pretty viral. So it shows that really, Donald Trump escalated once again, saying he was going to pull all US troops out of Europe if he doesn't get Greenland, and Frederiksen having to say, there are plenty of enemies outside of NATO. We don't need to have any animosity within the union.
What is interesting about the way that the papers are covering all this is that everybody has a different take. So we have the Rutte problem, which is the issue of what is your self-respect like. We have the Spain issue, but if you look at Politico, it's saying Trump reignites in Greenland feud with Europe at NATO. Then it says the Washington Post says Trump surprises NATO allies with praise, and then we have the Mark Rutte thing from the Independent, and then CNBC. Trump calls cold water on NATO allies' united front. What Trump has seemed to do is successfully destabilise the way that the outside world is looking at NATO, depending on what subject matter, indeed what geography he's covering.
Yeah, or what hour of the day it is and what Truth Social posts he's just posted. This is the problem. NATO needs to look like a united front. The whole basis of it is that it is an alliance that moves in lockstep, that there is no evident disagreement on the outside, because there's increasing reports that, Vladimir Putin in quite a desperate situation now as petrol stations across Russia seem to be running dry. We've seen these fights breaking out between drivers, that he might do something desperate, that he might, for instance, the US has warned, test the sovereignty of Poland by potentially moving troops through the country, or, some kind of other very provocative action, and just to see whether and how NATO responds. And if you've got Donald Trump going to the sort of heart of NATO, causing all these little mini sort of disputes, then Vladimir Putin likely thinks, well, they're in a confused position. Why don't I try and do this now and see what happens?
Let's move on to another story about Donald Trump, but about his plane. It's the New York Times. And it is one of those examples of when one small thing reflects a much, much bigger problem. And this was to do with Donald Trump's departure from Turkey.
Yeah, there was much fanfare when he left for Ankara at the weekend, because he was flying in this new 747, I think 900 it is, that the Qataris gave him, which has been retrofitted, but it came out of the shop in Texas much quicker. We'd been told that it would take at minimum sort of 2 years to do this, and it was under a year, which did sort of spark questions about how much adaptation the plane had to serve as Air Force One, because it needs things like, it needs sort of defense systems for missiles and other kind of electronic hardening in case it's hit by some kind of EMP blast. And so he was sort of made much of the fact that he was in his sort of shiny, fancy new plane in the livery colours that he wanted. But yesterday, I was in a newsroom where we were looking at the live feed of the departure, and all of a sudden we all spotted, wait, he's flying back in the old plane with
different colour.
That sort of, the Jackie Kennedy colours.
The turquoise blue.
Yeah, that's correct. And so that sparked a lot of questions. And it turns out that this was at the demand of the Secret Service. Donald Trump obviously flew to Ankara, only 1,000 miles away for where he's reignited bombing against Iran. The Secret Service were worried about his security and so demanded he fly. Now, he's tried to maintain that the other plane is great, it can do everything. But experts are reporting to the New York Times that there is no way that they could have had the defensive measures that were needed. The reported costs, which would have been $1 billion, they're saying they only spent $400 million. And so, this plane is a gift to Trump. There's been this question that, well, what happens at the end of his term? He seems to think he gets to take it. US taxpayers paying all that money to retrofit it just for a couple of years seems wild. And journalists, apparently, when they boarded, were told Trump was on board already. He didn't do the usual sort of, smile at the top of the stairs. They were instructed to put down the window shutters and made a very quick exit. So very clearly, that new plane is not safe enough to fly him around in, because the old plane then landed overnight here in the UK, and he boarded the new plane to go back. So incredible cost for US taxpayers just on these trips, but it shows that he is doing something in vanity that potentially makes him vulnerable.
Finally, let's talk about the absolutely magnificent Norwegian football team, who have been surprising everybody, and they beat Brazil at the end of last week. And everybody's been enjoying the sheer Viking raw power of Erling Haaland. But there's a lovely story in The Guardian, isn't there, about why actually the ferocious competitiveness of the World Cup was not the point of football for kids in Norway in the 1980s.
Yeah, this is a story called No League Tables, No Trophies, how Norway made sport fun for kids and built a football team that beat Brazil. Now, Norway, let's not forget, it's only a country of 5.5 million people. It has sort of incredible soft power around the world, but it also has something quite unique. Whereas in most countries like Brazil, if someone is spotted as being a real talent for a particular sport in the childhood, they're often put into sort of national development systems. They're sort of hot-housed into that one sport at the expense of everything else. That is not allowed in Norway. They developed a system in the 1980s that was sort of formalized in 2007, and it's called the Norges Idrettsforbund, the NIF, and it has 8 rights that make sure that all children are safe and enjoy playing sports. So, for instance, until you under the age of 9, children play only in local club matches. There are no results lists, no league tables, no trophies. Regional competition opens only at 11. And scores and rankings, that sort of starts at sort of 13 when they have national championships. But it also means that some of the players like Haaland play multiple sports through to their teenage years. So they're doing cross-country skiing and handball and football. And then they decide when they are ready to make the decision about what they want to do, what they will pursue. And this is the case for multiple players in this team. And it's been credited, for instance, in the way that some of them play slightly differently because they've picked up skills from other sports. And also, of course, Norway was the winner of the Winter Olympics. Obviously, they are such a strong powerhouse in those Winter Games, but they won the Winter Olympic medal table earlier this year. And it's really posing a look at whether the kind of super competitive hothousing of children is actually the right way to go to get results in adulthood.
Just kick a ball. Vincent McAviney, journalist for the likes of the BBC and ITV, and obviously round the table here. Thank you so much for bringing us the paper review. You're listening to The Globalist. Now here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The US military says it struck 90 targets in Iran in the latest round of airstrikes over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says it's attacked US assets in neighbouring countries in retaliation. People in Taiwan and southwestern Japan are bracing for a major typhoon. It's approaching from the southeast and is expected to reach the area this weekend. Search teams have recovered wreckage from a cargo plane that went missing off the coast of Pakistan on Tuesday. They're still looking for the 5 missing crew members. And the HBO Max show The Pit leads the Emmy Awards race this year with 25 nominations. Another hit from the streamer Hacks follows with 24. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, a quick look behind the headlines now. Here's Monocle's Deputy Head of Radio, Tom Webb. He's telling us why the hotel group Accor wants to double its footprint in China.
China's hotel market has been a shaky place to hedge your bets in recent years. Travel restrictions, tight visa requirements and fears of surveillance have all helped to turn off international arrivals. Coupled with a property crisis triggered by developer debt defaults and falling home prices, global hotel chains have been more risk-averse than usual. But since China recently dropped visa requirements for 50 countries, as Beijing focuses on the economic benefits of international visitors, foreign visitor numbers look to set to surge past pre-pandemic levels, French hotel group Accor senses a moment of opportunity. The crisis has made land and existing infrastructure much cheaper. As a company that isn't reliant upon heavy construction, unfinished and underperforming properties are available for a discount. Though recovery in China is expected to be lengthy, the country has always been a long-term growth market for Accor, which already has some 820 hotels. It plans to double its footprint to 1,600 by 2031. Sebastian Barzan, CEO of Accor, told Monocle, since the start of 2026, international guest stays at our hotels in mainland China have grown by 46%, with especially strong performance from 3 key markets, Asia Pacific, Middle East and Europe. What seems like a gamble on the outside is, to Accor, a vote of confidence in China's next phase.
That was Monocle's Tom Webb. For more, you can sign up to our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute. Head over to monocle.com/minute for more. This is The Globalist. It's 16:32 in Melbourne, 8:32 a.m. if you're listening in Zurich. Now, for India and its 1.4 billion strong population, Australia is a key partner and is growing in importance. India needs energy, and Australia holds more than a quarter of the world's uranium supplies. It's key in the nuclear power industry. Well, it's in this context and that of a growing need to counter China that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Melbourne. And both Australia and India stand to benefit from closer ties. Earlier, this was the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announcing that a large Australian pension fund is investing in India.
I welcome the announcement that we have had this morning from Paul Schroeder from Australian Super, that they will invest an additional 500 million Australian dollars into India's National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. This is about building on and broadening out the 4 key priorities in our roadmap: clean energy, education and skills, agribusiness and tourism.
So that's the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese there talking about the large Australian pension fund, Australian Super, investing in India. But what does India stand to gain from Prime Minister Modi's visit to Melbourne? Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now from Sydney by Adam Hancock. He's a journalist who reports for NPR, Al Jazeera and a regular voice here on Monocle Radio. Good afternoon, Adam.
Hello, good afternoon.
So this is the annual Australian-Indian Leaders Summit. Narendra Modi arriving in Melbourne to great fanfare.
Yes, and there's going to be even more fanfare this evening because there's going to be an event in Melbourne at the Marvel Stadium, which is one of the biggest sporting arenas in Melbourne. It's called Melbourne Meets Modi, and it's estimated to 30,000 people, mainly members of the Indian community here in Australia, are going to be present. Modi, of course, is going to be there. Anthony Albanese will be there as well, and there's going to be speeches. And it's a little bit of a trademark of a Narendra Modi overseas visit. He likes to get out and meet the Indian community in whichever country he's visiting. There are a lot of Indians or people from Indian origin here in Australia. Many people are travelling across the country to go to Melbourne to this event tonight, but it won't all be fanfare. There's going to be some protests as well, we understand. Australia's Alliance Against Islamophobia have said they're going to protest outside the stadium, raising awareness of what they call the persecution of minority groups in India. And that there's also going to be a group protesting against Indian migration to Australia as well. But we do think that's going to be a huge event tonight, maybe a record, because last time it came to Sydney, there were around 20,000 there, but we think there might be more than that in Melbourne tonight. And
at the meeting, the Australia-Indian Leaders Summit, I mean, what's on the agenda? I've mentioned energy and I've mentioned China. So let's deal with energy first. India needs Australia's uranium.
Yes, absolutely. India has nuclear energy ambitions, and it desperately needs access to Australia's uranium reserves. As you mentioned, over a quarter of the world's total reserves are in Australia. There was actually a deal in place between both countries back in 2014 on nuclear cooperation, but we saw very few shipments of Australian uranium going to India because of concerns over how that uranium would be used. But today, finally, they've got a deal over the line now. It's just been announced in the last hour or so, meaning that Australia and India, Australia's going to export uranium to India for use in their nuclear energy industry. And they're also going to deepen cooperation in renewables and critical minerals as well. So one such critical mineral is lithium, which India wants to get its hands on because they want to become a leader in the electric vehicle market, and lithium is crucial in that industry. So for India, it's all about securing these deals and getting access to these critical minerals, whereas for Australia, well, for both sides really, it's also about defence as well. They're both very concerned about China's ambitions in this part of the world. We saw earlier this week a missile test by China, which caused a lot of alarm here in Australia. And I think these are two countries that together view this as an opportunity to work together to deepen security ties and try and counter some of the threat of China in this part of the world, which here in Australia, at least, they believe is very real.
Indeed. I mean, what is the long-term strategy here between Australia and India? Priorities change. We've mentioned power and we've mentioned the countering the threat from China. But do India and Australia really boast a true friendship here?
I think right now it certainly feels that way. I mean, this is the third visit by Narendra Modi to Australia. Both leaders have spoken very warmly about each of his countries. They've reaffirmed commitment to education, to defence. There's a huge Indian community here in Australia, and they both really have a lot of shared fears and shared concerns. So I think you can definitely see a partnership. I mean, both obviously are members of the Quad Alliance, along with Japan and the United States. And that certainly is an alliance that has very much gone off the radar for the US in the last few years. So I think we may now see, countries just talk of India, Japan and Australia effectively kind of going it alone with the Quad and setting up their own alliance. So we may now, because the US is seemingly disinterested in certain parts of the world right now, we may now see countries like India and Australia going their own way, forging their own path, and creating their own defence deals and security deals, because quite frankly, I don't think Australia is just going to sit and wait for the US to become involved again. They are worried about China and they need partners they can rely on.
Adam Hancock, Sydney-based journalist for NPR and Monocle Radio, thank you so much for joining me on the programme. It's just turning 15:38 in Tokyo, which is where we head to next, because one of Japan's highest anticipated yet cripplingly delayed rail projects seems to be finally getting going. When completed, the linear Shinkansen Maglev project will connect Shinagawa in Tokyo, one of the world's busiest rail centres, to Nagoya, some 350 kilometres southwest, in around 40 minutes. Well, I'm joined now from Studio 3 by Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor Fiona Wilson. A very good afternoon to you, Fiona.
Hi, Emma.
Just talk us through the route, the importance of Tokyo to Nagoya, and the fact that they're going to shave, a good 50 minutes off the journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be unbelievably fast, this train. You're talking at 500 kilometres an hour. And actually, when they did the test, it went over 600 kilometres an hour. It's so fast. When you see it, it just sort of flies by in a second. I think this is just such a huge project. I mean, Japan's been talking about these trains, these maglev, magnetic levitation trains, since the 60s, since the early 60s. They slightly got put aside for a while where they focused on their amazing bullet train system, got back into the maglev train. And they actually started construction in 2014, but there's been this stalemate in this one prefecture, Shizuoka, right in the middle of Japan. And the governor there was, he had a lot of complaints. He was worried about the environmental impact. And he really held it up for a long time. Legitimate complaints. They were concerned about the water table, the amount of, would this disrupt the water flow to this very important agricultural region? It's a big region for produce, for green tea, and they didn't want any trouble there. So that's been a long, long dispute. And then there's a new governor, since 2024, Yasutomo Suzuki, and he's the one who has finally said, OK, construction in Shizuoka can now begin.
What was it that changed? Was there just a change in governorship, or was there a realisation that this was actually quite an important thing for Japan to be able to achieve?
I think there's been some negotiation. So JR Central is the company behind this. They run the trains that, these very fast bullet trains that go to all the big cities we know, Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka. And they've been negotiating. They're talking about they want very close monitoring. So the construction, although the section in Shizuoka is only 9 kilometres, the construction of that part could take 10 years. It's a very sensitive area. You've got the southern Japan Alps, very difficult. And 90% of the route from Tokyo to Nagoya is going to be through tunnels. So don't expect a scenic ride, but it will certainly be impressive. And I think that whole area, basically from Tokyo to Osaka, if you look at the GDP of Japan, that area contributes more than half of Japan's total. It's really, really important. So they've been talking about this super mega region, and it's just this unbelievable economic powerhouse. And they would like this super fast train to connect all these places even more quickly.
This sounds obviously a very, very smooth journey now when this enormously fast train comes along. Was it 505 kilometres an hour is what it's going to be doing? I'm not sure anyone's quite ready yet for 600. But there are some politics still to be sorted out ahead, aren't there?
Yeah, there's just the length of time as well. The cost of this thing has doubled in a decade. The cost of labour, the cost of materials, it's astronomically expensive. And I think at the moment they're projecting that maybe the Tokyo-Nagoya bit could be, looking at a mid-2030s opening. Tokyo-Osaka could be mid-2040s. So this is really, they're in for the long haul. There's a lot to go through. Cities want it in there. They want it to go through their cities. Obviously it's going to have a big economic impact. And it's just the process, the actual construction is going to be something else. But I think it just also points to Japan's endless ambition for these projects. And I was noticing that the Shinkansen, which is already, and it's incredible, it's sort of 320 kilometers an hour. It's not exactly sleeping. That is projected. They're now taking that up to Sapporo in Hokkaido in the far north of Japan. And that will be, opening at the end of the 2030s. So there's no end. You think, this is a country with a declining population. The ambition doesn't stop. It's
incredible, though. But when you look now at who has the fastest trains, China tops the list, and then it's Germany, and then it's France, still with the TGV. Does Japan need to sort of? We talked about ambition, but does it now need to step up again in order to hit the top of the speed table again?
Yeah, I always think that's a bit of a shallow ambition, isn't it? It's a bit like having the tallest building in the world. Who really cares at this point? But yeah, it wouldn't be bad to have the fastest train, and it will be. If it all goes to plan. Obviously, China has a maglev, so does South Korea, but they're not as fast as this one. So yeah, there might be a bit of a neighbourly competition there.
A little bit of healthy competition. Finally, Fiona, yesterday in the NATO summit, Donald Trump was sitting next to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and he said this.
We had 111 missiles shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan.
Right, so we have 111 missiles shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan. I think he's referring to the missiles being shot at the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln over a period of 1 hour. What has been the reaction into Japan that they have suddenly been drawn into very violent conflict?
I think, Japan is quite used to Donald Trump's antics, to be honest. Poor Sanai Takaichi has been subjected to, we've all seen it, when he pointed out that Japan didn't give any warning about Pearl Harbor. I think they will politely overlook this. And, obviously it's extremely embarrassing for the US. It does rather put into question the cognitive abilities of the president of the US, which is very embarrassing.
I mean, what has been the reaction in Japan? Because the rest of the world has rather enjoyed it, but as you say, this is a delicate issue for the Japanese.
Yeah, I think that Takaichi, she's not making a big issue of it. She's not looking for trouble with the US, and I think the general view of the Japanese government is just to sort of draw a veil over it. They assume that it was a mistake, and they're not going to get drawn into embarrassing the president any further.
Fiona, what else are you looking at the moment when it comes to covering stuff in Monocle?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just suddenly turned absolutely boiling here, but I don't know. When I'm talking to someone in London, it doesn't really make any difference, does it? I tell you one thing I am very interested in, and who would have thought it'd be interesting, but the opening of a convenience store tomorrow is causing absolute mayhem. Nigo, who's the streetwear supremo, the founder of Bathing Ape, Human Made, if you know those labels, he's opening his first convenience store tomorrow, Family Mart, in Azabudai Hills, near Roppongi, and that is causing an absolute sensation. I think there will be massive crowds when it opens tomorrow, so I might try and get into the throng.
Wonderful. Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor, thank you so much for joining us from Japan. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
We head now to Mexico to hear about the architect and academic Fernanda Canales, known for designing everything from private homes to major public and cultural buildings across the country. Well, Monocle's design editor Nick Moniz recently visited her home in Mexico City to talk about how she challenges conventional ideas about privacy and domestic life, as well as her latest book, My House, Your City, Privacy in a Shared World.
I like when architects say the life of their building starts when they move out of the construction site. And yes, it's probably the second life of the building, but then the third one and the fourth one, no? Like all of the different layers and different lives that will come. And obviously that interests me more and more, but as well the consideration of architecture not only as buildings, which I think that has been a mistake, and it was really embedded in my learning of architecture as isolated buildings, or, I mean, they don't have to be isolated, they usually are, but even just the understanding of the work of an architect as something related to buildings. And I think that's a very poor understanding of architecture. It diminishes everything that we can do. So now I'm happy to introduce these different scales working. Before I used to say like, oh, I'm not an architect when I'm writing, or I don't do architecture if I'm designing a piece of furniture, or now I'm not an architect because I'm just teaching. And I listen to that frequently with other friends. They say, no, I used to be an architect, but now I'm just specializing in lighting or whatever. And it's a very poor and dangerous way of understanding our profession. So why not understand that architecture is much more than buildings, and even understanding space, even much more than buildings. And when you understand that, then, for example, I don't know, projects that are linked more to landscape architecture, it's not about what's landscape and what's architecture and what's building and what's nature. It's about the understanding of how we live and understanding space, disregarding if it has a roof, then it's architecture. If it does not have a roof, then it's like... So I think it has been really confusing or mistaken, those understandings.
I want to unpack that a little bit. You as an architect, that's also a writer. We've talked a little bit about residences here. I'm holding one of your books, My House, Your City, which also actually kind of, the title obviously speaks to something you've mentioned before. The home isn't necessarily a private space. You need to account for its relationship with neighbours, with maybe the people that come and service it. I mean, putting on your architecture hat, but then analysing, homes through a writer's lens. What did you kind of discover or unpack? Were there, I know looking at the blurb, there's kind of 3 erroneous presumptions that you challenged. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, actually the title, My Home, Your City, the idea is that you can turn it around and it's also Your House, My City, or the other way around. And it opens up the discussion and these 3 huge misunderstandings or myths or errors of architecture or housing understood as a private space, which is not, understood as a place to rest, this sanctuary for the nuclear family, which also we know there are much more relations not linked to blood ties. And it's never a sanctuary for rest because it has always been linked to production, to consumption, and also to work, in understanding also the work done inside the houses that have been invisibilized. So I've been doing a lot of research, and it's also related to projects. It all started with a client that commissioned a house that seemed to be like very standard typology of a weekend house for his family. It was himself, his wife, and 2 kids. And what it seemed to be just like a very standard typology, it began being a very complex house because it was going to be used temporarily, just as a weekend house for him. But then he also needed to house the caretakers, which are usually, at least in Mexico, it's not only one person, but his wife or whatever, and they have family as well, so you also have the kids, and they were going to be permanently living there because it was a very remote area, 2-hour drive from Mexico City. So it was not a house for one family, it was a house for 2 families, one permanent, one temporary, and then the owners also wanted to house their extended family. So a house for 3 families at least, or even sometimes 4 or more. And it became a very exciting experimental project because it needed to combine all of these more complex ways of relating, not only among people, but with the site itself, because it was not going to be connected to any water systems or sewage. It needed to produce its own electricity. So it ended up being something that interested me beyond that project, and it made me study examples in the past 200 years related to other ways of inhabiting with many different types of people, and also considering our relations with resources.
I want to I love that story of your mum before, talking about the windows on a Corbusier project. Changing gears slightly, maybe to go a little bit silly, a little bit playful, but has she ever given you feedback on your own work, or have you got feedback from your children as clients? Tell us a little bit about that and how that's maybe also shaped. I'm trying to bring all of this together into a full circle moment.
Yes, definitely it has been important, and I always try to listen more the opinions about my projects, my architectural projects, from people who are not architects, because they really are considering other things, which in my world, architectural work would be diminished as these are not important, they don't know, it's not about the architecture, but actually they might be focusing in minor things, and those minor things become the everyday and become really huge. And it has to do with understanding comfort in another way, or this future maintenance of things. So yeah, I always try to be more open to the comments of non-specialists, because they provide really crude and important lens through which architecture can really take other meaning.
And that was a Mexican architect and academic, Fernanda Canales, talking to Monocle's design editor, Nick Moniz. Finally, a village on the banks of one of Italy's most beautiful lakes has joined the growing list of European tourist spots in banning bare chests in the street. Varenna, which lies on Lake Como, will fine anyone wandering around topless or in swimwear anywhere except on the beach or in a boat. Well, joining me now in the studio, wrapped up warm, is Monocle producer Anita Riotta. Anita, very good morning to you. This is a pretty reasonable request, isn't it? And it's happening everywhere.
I absolutely think it is, Emma. I think what's interesting, especially in the smaller villages that are seeing an influx of tourism over the last few years, is that you have to make sure that you're retaining a sense of that town, retaining a sense of the cultural norms of how it would look like if there weren't people visiting from other places. And so maybe some things that to those locals feels like second nature, feels like common sense, is completely reasonable for someone from outside to not know. But then I think it's all right to enforce that and make sure that the town looks and feels like it normally would.
I love the idea. Excuse me. I love the idea of how they're going to enforce this. That you're going to be fined between 50 and 500 euros, depending. And I don't know what the difference is. I mean, is it the size of the person? Is it the attractiveness of the? I did that, but we're not going there. But you know what I mean? It says what's a reasonably topless fine for 50 euros? And
the size of the bathing shorts, maybe.
Yeah, we could go for that.
You got to make sure something's covered.
The major offenders are the 500 euro fines. I mean, what are these people doing that requires them to have a 10 times higher fine than everybody else? But when we look more widely at the likes of Italy, we've got... I think Sorrento in 2022 was jumped onto the hefty fines for showing your top, or being topless, I should say. That's already happened 4 years ago. Then Portofino, you're not allowed to have a selfie taken. And also, you're not allowed to sort of loiter, and there are no waiting zones. There seems to be this more sort of regimented approach to tourism by Italy.
Absolutely. I think that the amount of tourism that especially smaller places in Italy are seeing, they're just not places meant or built to accommodate this many people. So to ensure that both tourists and locals are able to enjoy all of the amazing nature that Italy has to offer, I think this makes sense. And, we've discussed over the summer, some of them feel sillier. In Italy now, there's a rule where in some towns where you cannot build elaborate sandcastles because they take up too much space on the beach and they can block walkways. And then we also discussed, you can't reserve a spot with your towel, but that might seem silly. But if you think about it and you have, a huge hotel that goes up or Airbnbs start to grow, and then, people are just going at 6 a.m., putting down their towel and then going back to bed for a few hours, it just ruins the ability for a larger amount of people to enjoy it and to have a sort of still quotidian sense of the town.
I don't know what's worse though. If you go down and you leave your towel and then you have it taken away from you and there is a subsequent dispute and fracas over where your towel is and some poor soul has been dispatched down to the beach to take your towel away. I don't know what is worse, dealing with someone hogging the space or the subsequent problems which are going to probably ensue all day when the beach actually becomes a bit of a stress.
I see the point that you're presenting, but I thought, I think maybe this is best encapsulated by Varenna's mayor, the town that we started this conversation in. When he was addressing this new rule, he said, we're so proud to welcome all these hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world. However, our residents' quality of life cannot be sacrificed on the altar of mass tourism.
Amazing.
And I think that just says everything right there. It's okay to welcome people and to make some, accommodations, but the town has to feel like its first priority is to maintain a positive and appealing quality of life there, because if those people leave and they feel like their life has just been trampled by tourism, well, then the town either becomes some sort of Disneyland or it faces some serious problems.
And Monocle's Anita Riotta, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Anita Riotta, Laura Kramer, Thomas Waterhouse and Rima Takahashi. Our researcher is Josefina Gomez and our studio manager is Steph Chungu. After the headlines, more music's on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks very much for listening.